We meet a young boy named Rio, who in this world begins to remember fragments of his past life. He recalls promising a girl long ago that he would return to marry her, a memory that brings him comfort. Suddenly, the bus approaches a railroad crossing and, unable to stop in time, is hit by a train. The train derails, and as he loses consciousness, Haruto remembers his promise to always stay by the side of the one he loves. After the accident, Haruto awakens in an unfamiliar place, faintly realizing that something has changed. However, he doesn't yet understand that his soul has been reincarnated into the body of a boy named Rio. His memories are fragmented, and he recalls moments from his past life, confused about where he is and what's happening. In this new place, Rio notices some boys nearby, surprised that he's woken up after thinking he was dead due to a fever. They sit down to eat, and Rio, feeling hungry, approaches them, but is turned away without food. Stepping outside, he finds some berries to eat, and in doing so, recalls flashes of the accident. His mind becomes muddled with childhood memories, including a promise his mother made to take him to his grandmother before she was killed. Rio's thoughts are interrupted by two girls who ask if he's seen a girl with purple hair. They plan to search the slums, and Rio suggests they change their clothes to blend in better. One of the girls, Celia, uses magic to track traces of energy. She senses a strong magical presence radiating from Rio, and surprised, notes that he has an excess of magic. Rio notices a glow around him, which, as he realizes, only he can see. Celia gives him silver coins, which seem to Rio to be a generous gift. Returning home, he's suddenly attacked by an assassin, but the coin pouch absorbs the initial blow, saving him. When the assassin strikes again, Rio hears a mysterious voice encouraging him to feel the flow of magic and heighten his senses. Acting on instinct, Rio blocks the attack, dodges, and disarms the assailant. After the fight, he hears movement in a bag and discovers a girl hidden inside, begging him to take her back to the castle. However, upon seeing the dead bodies around her, she faints from shock. Rio brings the girl to her companions, but one of them, misunderstanding the situation, slaps him. He tries to explain himself, but they interrupt him and insist that he go with them to their castle. While searching the house, they find another wounded man, whom they kill. At the castle, Rio endures a harsh interrogation, accused of kidnapping and repeatedly struck. However, when Flora, the girl he saved, regains consciousness and learns about his arrest, she requests that Rio be thanked for saving her. The girls then insist he is innocent, and upon seeing him, are horrified by his injuries. Celia sincerely apologizes, using magic to heal his wounds. When Rio wakes up, Celia once again apologizes for the misunderstanding, and he realizes all his injuries have been healed. Celia informs him that the king wishes to thank him personally for rescuing Princess Flora. Rio asks Celia to teach him etiquette before his meeting with the king, and she happily agrees. Once prepared, he enters the throne room and respectfully bows before the king. Rio, recently admitted to the academy, asks Claire to help him learn how to read and write. Claire, explaining that this is a school for children from noble families, is surprised by his request, but agrees to help. Rio assures her he understands his position, and she introduces him to the other students, though they react coldly toward him. When Rio introduces himself to the class, he again senses their hostility. Claire writes some exercises on the board, and to the students' surprise, it becomes clear that Rio doesn't yet know how to read or write. After class, Rio visits Claire's office and notices it's a bit messy. He jokingly comments that she looks very young, perhaps only 12 years old. Claire is impressed by how quickly he picks things up as Rio solves examples with ease. He explains that his mother taught him the basics. Claire offers him tea and asks about his first day at the academy. He requests some books to help him learn the alphabet, and Claire agrees to assist him. During training, one of the instructors notices Rio's natural talent and asks him to join a sparring match. Rio deflects the instructor's attacks, displaying impressive combat skills, and the instructor notes that Rio could become an excellent knight. Afterward, Rio continues studying, and Claire suggests he pace himself, but he assures her he's comfortable with his current pace. When the exam results come out, Rio has scored the highest alongside the princess. This stirs resentment among the students, with one of them accusing Rio of cheating. Claire and the instructor reassure the others, defending Rio, though some students remain unhappy and one storms off angrily. Later, while sharing tea, Claire shares stories from her past and says she'd be glad to be friends with him. Rio thanks her and says he hopes he can rely on her for support if needed, and Claire agrees. The academy begins selecting students to represent the school in a tournament, and the swordsmanship instructor chooses Rio, causing further discontent among some students who resent that Rio is from the slums. The instructor, however, firmly stands by his choice. Claire notes how much Rio has grown over the past 5 years. Rio admits he wants to leave the country and travel to Yagumo, his mother's homeland. Claire advises him to stay and find a position instead, but he responds that she will soon marry, and while she is a charming young woman, he is merely a commoner and cannot stay. When the tournament between knights and students begins, Rio is the first to enter the arena. One of the students wishes him luck, and Claire encourages him as well. His opponent turns out to be the knight who interrogated him 5 years ago. They begin their duel, and the knight recalls that his own status was reduced due to Rio. However, Rio disarms the knight and urges him to accept his defeat with honor. Later, in the office, the knight and an envoy discuss Rio and recall the interrogation from 5 years ago. The envoy realizes that Rio is the one who saved the princess. Claire notices Rio leaving and sees another girl approaching him with a proposal, sparking feelings of jealousy in her. Claire is reviewing assignments written by her students in the evening when she notices that Rio hasn't specified any future plans. She recalls that Rio mentioned he was planning to return to his homeland, which surprises her. During her lecture the next day, Claire instructs the students on magic, mentioning that they'll need to use it in their practical training. The students respond, saying they've already mastered basic skills, everyone except Rio. Claire asks them to demonstrate, but points out that they still haven't mastered these techniques as well as they think. Claire then performs an impressive display of multiple magic skills. Rio realizes he cannot use magic traditionally, but instead can control its flow. After class, one of the students admires Claire's skills. He accuses Rio of getting handsy with other students, which prompts the teacher to intervene, though Rio himself warns the boy to avoid acting foolishly during practical training. Meanwhile, Princess Flora worries about Rio taking on too much by himself. Before the group training session begins, students discuss their plans for team challenges, saying they've mapped out a route and had soldiers from their families survey the area. Rio is included, though only to carry their supplies. Flora offers to help Rio, but he declines. During the journey, they encounter a group of goblins which they quickly defeat using magic. Rio is quietly observing something nearby, and the group scolds him for distracting them. Meanwhile, an ambassador who had previously attempted to kidnap the princess watches from a distance, noting that Rio almost noticed him. The group then reaches a cliff, only to be ambushed by orcs. As they raise their shields, one of the students is injured, and Princess Flora falls off the cliff. Rio catches her but falls himself. The students regroup and attack the orcs, using their magic and successfully defeating them. Rio, meanwhile, realizes he survived the fall without injury due to his abilities. As he makes his way back, he overhears some students accusing him of pushing Flora off the cliff. Despite these accusations, Flora insists she'll go search for him. Suddenly, they hear a roar as a massive monster appears, impervious to the students' magic. The group enhances their abilities and attacks, but the monster easily deflects their efforts and counterattacks, injuring several students. Flora, however, is busy treating other injured students when the monster approaches her. Rio notices this and orders her to run while he fights the monster alone. Flora watches as Rio skillfully deflects the monster's attacks, looking for the perfect moment to strike. He eventually finds an opening and defeats the monster with ease. When the students arrive and find Flora safe, they rush to her, while the ambassador continues observing Rio from afar. Claire overhears the king and the duke discussing how they plan to accuse Rio of things he didn't do. Soon after, Rio arrives and Claire embraces him in relief. He explains what happened, admitting that his words are unlikely to make a difference. He decides to say goodbye, realizing he can no longer stay at the academy. He promises to write to Flora and keeps his distance to protect her. Claire, seeing him go, hugs him and promises to wait for his letters. She tears up, recalling all the moments they shared, the first time they met, how she healed him, and when she first invited him to her office. Meanwhile, the Duke arranges for a servant girl to use Rio's scent from his clothing to track him down and kill him, and the girl agrees. Rio moves quickly through the forest, effortlessly overcoming monsters along the way. He arrives at a new town, one not yet aware of the rumors about him. However, an assassin girl is secretly following him. As Rio strolls through the city, he's offered pasta, which reminds him of a dish from his previous life. He tries it, enjoying the taste, and then remembers his goal. He plans to visit his parents' homeland. Exploring further, he comes across a massive trading house and is surprised by its size. At the entrance, the girl asks Rio to hand over his weapon, curiously noting his dark hair. She then informs him she'll be escorting him through the establishment. As Rio sips his tea, the girl returns, mentioning that his requested items are prepared. She notices his familiarity with tea etiquette and asks him about the tea's flavor. Rio also writes a final letter to Claire, telling her he's leaving the last checkpoint. The trading house workers note that Rio isn't a local. Continuing his journey, Rio encounters a young girl in the forest who suddenly attacks him. He dodges her strikes but soon notices a dart embedded in him, coated with poison. He quickly uses his skills to neutralize the poison, much to the girl's surprise. as she realizes it's ineffective. She resumes her assault, but Rio counters by throwing shurikens, which she skillfully evades. The girl amplifies her strength, but Rio reacts swiftly, dodging her attacks and eventually pinning her to the ground. The girl begins to cry, pleading for mercy, and Rio knocks her out temporarily, then ties her up and searches her belongings, finding a subjugation collar on her neck. This triggers the girl's memories of being enslaved and mistreated. When she awakens, Rio reassures her, saying he won't harm her if she cooperates. He shows her that he's removed the painful collar, causing her to cry in relief. Rio asks who ordered her to kill him, and she reveals that a man named Stead trained her, leading Rio to suspect that the Duke issued the order. When he asks if she still intends to kill him, she says she won't. Rio tells her she's free and can head east to the Wildlands, which is also his destination. As he leaves, he notices the girl is following him. She explains that she wants to travel with him. Rio asks if she fears him because he's human, to which she replies that he can reapply the collar if it helps him trust her. She introduces herself as Latifa, and Rio realizes she's hungry. He gives her a sandwich, and she tells him she's only ever been fed scraps. As they cross the border, Latifa apologizes for slowing him down, so Rio decides to make camp. Meanwhile, Claire reads Rio's final letter, worrying for him. As night falls, Rio prepares food for Latifa, who falls asleep after eating. She begins to scream in her sleep, and Rio comforts her, hearing her mention Tokyo in her dreams. Latifa then notices his black hair, and recalls that he resembles a boy from the bus. She asks if she can call him brother, and Rio agrees. They continue their journey, overcoming several obstacles together. At one point, Rio notices a massive tree that Latifa can't see, so he decides to go toward it. Latifa remarks that she smells something unusual, and they make camp once more. After putting Latifa to sleep again, Rio steps out of the tent and encounters a wolf. Rio encounters a wolf that suddenly begins to glow, temporarily blinding him. At that moment, he is attacked by half-humans, and to protect himself, Rio uses sensory magic. He introduces himself, but they find the girl he put to sleep with his magic, and decide that he's a threat. They attack him, injuring him in the process. Rio attempts to heal his wound and explain himself, but they refuse to listen, capturing and knocking him out. While unconscious, Rio sees a spirit girl who has always protected him. She tells him that she is bound to him, that she belongs only to him, and warns that their time is limited, wishing him sweet dreams. When he wakes, Rio realizes he's tied up, but Latifa runs up to him and hugs him. The half-humans, seeing that Rio isn't a threat, kneel to apologize, but Rio asks them to stand. They leave him and Latifa alone to wait until morning. At dawn, the village elder leads Rio to the council, where they are prepared to apologize formally. Along the way, Rio mentions that the great tree has been a landmark on his journey, and the elder explains that only those with knowledge of spiritual arts can see it. Rio says he taught himself these skills. At the council, the elders apologize, and Rio also apologizes for stepping onto their land uninvited. They discuss giving him a gift, but struggle due to their cultural differences. So Rio requests they take Latifa under their care, which the elders confirm they were already planning to do. The elders also invite Rio to stay in the village to be near Latifa, and even suggest he could choose a wife from among the village girls. Rio asks them to teach him spiritual arts, and soon Lady Dryas, the spirit of the world tree, appears before him. She senses another spirit's presence within him and explains that this is what prevents him from using magic. She asks to meet this spirit, touches her forehead to his, and detects a tremendous power within him. She's unsure if he is truly human, sensing a high-ranking spirit within him, perhaps one from thousands of years ago. Stunned by this revelation, the elders decide to treat Rio with even greater respect and designate him a saint. Lady Dryas leads Rio to his new home, where Latifa excitedly shows him around, mentioning that they'll need to choose rooms, as some of the village girls will live with him as well. The elder clarifies that this arrangement will help other half-humans trust Rio, and he agrees, much to the girls' delight. Rio asks them to stop calling him master. Lady Dryas teaches him magic and they make wine together. Rio also learns blacksmithing, combat skills, and takes part in the grand spiritual ceremony with Lady Dryas. Meanwhile, an envoy is flying to a cave on a hawk with a young soldier. The soldier recalls his induction into the brigade, and the envoy entrusts him to carry an egg to the city, reassuring him there's no danger. But when the envoy looks back, he sees a massive dragon approaching and a smile crosses his face. A year after Rio's arrival, the village elder introduces him formally to the Beastmen community, acknowledging the many contributions he and Latifa have made. They're officially welcomed as village residents, and the ceremony turns into a celebration. Some of the girls drink and start embracing Rio, leaning against him affectionately, expressing how they'd like to grow even closer to him. Rio, somewhat bashful, says he'd be happy to deepen his friendship with them. They head off to get more drinks, and the elder approaches Rio. Rio then tells him that he plans to inform Latifa soon that he'll need to leave the village, though the elder suggests the timing might not be ideal. Elsewhere, an envoy and a guard have stopped to rest for the night. The envoy hands a tracking crystal to the guard to swallow, promising it will keep him safe, and heads off, claiming he'll scout the area. As he flies off, he spots a group of dragons approaching and, realizing the danger, decides to use the guard as bait. Back in the village, Rio talks privately with Latifa, asking how she feels about her new life. Latifa expresses her happiness and gratitude that Rio is by her side. When Rio gently breaks the news that he'll soon need to leave, Latifa becomes very upset, refusing to accept it, and runs away, hurt by his words. Meanwhile, strange creatures are spotted approaching the village's barrier, so the villagers mobilize to investigate. Meanwhile, the envoy returns to the cave with dragon eggs and realizes that the creature guarding them has left them unattended. He steals the eggs and vanishes. Soon after, the beastmen spot the guard and his griffin by a lake. They confront him, demanding answers, but he refuses to speak, only freeing his griffin and flying away. The village warriors try to intercept him, but he evades them, and they realize he's flying directly toward the village. Meanwhile, a pack of wyverns descends on him, drawn by the eggs he carries. When the envoy notices this, he destroys the tracking crystal, killing the guard as he plummets from the sky. Back in the forest, Latifa hears Rio's words echoing in her mind. She then hears something fall nearby and sees a broken egg on the ground. A wyvern lands, enraged by the sight of its damaged offspring. Chaos spreads in the village as they initiate an evacuation. The elder informs Rio about the threat, canceling the festival as wyverns approach the village. Realizing that Latifa is still outside, Rio rushes to find her. Latifa and another girl try to defend against the wyvern's attacks, using magic and beast enhancements, but they're unable to damage it. Latifa suggests they retreat, but her friend refuses, standing her ground. Latifa distracts the wyvern, but is nearly crushed under its weight until Rio arrives, using magic to save her at the last second. He asks Latifa to stay back while he confronts the wyvern barehanded, deflecting its flames and eventually striking it down. The other girl is in awe of how quickly Rio defeated such a powerful creature. The following day, Latifa apologizes to Rio for running away, feeling like a burden. Rio reassures her, saying she'll always be his little sister, which makes her blush. He then explains his mission to the east, his desire to honor his parents' memory. Latifa shares her own past, revealing that she once lived in Japan just as Rio did. Rio then tells her about his vow to grow stronger in this world. When the time comes for Rio's departure, the elders present him with gifts: a dwarven sword, armor, weapons, and a spatial storage artifact. He stores all his belongings inside and promises to return if the village ever needs him. Latifa hugs him tightly, and they say their goodbyes as Rio sets off on his journey. For 2 weeks, Rio has been traveling in the Nagumo region, noticing that nearly everyone there has black hair. He approaches some local girls and asks if they can introduce him to the village elder. They agree, and upon meeting the elder, she immediately notices Rio's unusual attire, realizing he is not from the village. He shares a bit about his parents, which catches the elder's attention. When he mentions their names, she asks the girls to leave so they can speak privately. Alone, Rio reveals more details about his parents, explaining how his mother had promised to bring him here but never had the chance. The elder confirms that he isn't mistaken and reveals she knew his parents. She explains that she is, in fact, his paternal grandmother and that his parents already have graves in the village. She adds that his parents had to leave the village long ago, and then tells Rio he has a sister. After visiting his parents' graves, Rio returns home, where his grandmother and his sister warmly welcome him. The next morning, Rio wakes early to find his grandmother already up, and soon after, his sister appears half-dressed. He decides to prepare soup, showcasing his cooking skills. When a few neighbors drop by, they are surprised by how delicious the soup tastes. Rio's grandmother asks one of the villagers to introduce him to a man named Dora, a hunter. One of the men doubts Rio's skills and invites him to join their hunt. During the hunt, Shin, one of the hunters, is shocked by Rio's expertise. However, Shin grows frustrated as he fails to catch anything himself. The hunting trainer is so impressed that he asks Rio to join him every morning. After getting covered in dirt from training, Rio uses spirit arts to create a bath for himself. The local girls are impressed by his abilities, while the other young men watch with jealousy, assuming Rio is weak despite his talents. Later, when one of the girls shows her affection for Rio by leaning on him, it sparks even more resentment among the men. As he helps around the village, more girls start noticing him, causing the envy to grow. One day, the elder asks Rio to escort some wagons, but their conversation is interrupted by a report of a fight. Boys from another village have come to speak with the elder. They see the local girls in traditional robes, which sparks jealousy, and one of them proposes to one of the girls. When one of the local boys lashes out, the elder intervenes, allowing them to stay in the village for the night. Later, Rio encounters one of these boys who tries to trip him only to fall himself. The elder instructs everyone to stay indoors, and she arranges for Saya and Ruru to stay with Rio in his cabin. As a token of protection, Rio gives the girls a charm with a red stone. The next day, the other village's elder's son claims they'll fix the wagon by day's end and suggests they celebrate later. In the morning, a tax collector arrives in the village. The villagers serve him a meal, and Rio continues training while the girls watch, asking why he pushes himself so hard. Rio mentions a girl he loved as a child, unsure if she even remembers him. Later that night, while the girls are asleep, intruders from the other village sneak into the house to abduct them. Rio intercepts them and, without hesitation, takes down each attacker. In the end, he nearly beats the son of the other village elder to death, but is interrupted by the tax collector who steps in just in time. Realizing how close he came to killing someone again, Rio reflects on who he is becoming. The elder and the girls watch, and Rio apologizes for his actions, but they reassure him that he did the right thing. Hayato takes custody of the criminals who attacked the girls and collects the taxes. The village elder thanks Hayato and asks him to deliver a letter to his father. Rio is also heading to the capital, so Hayato invites him and Shin to join him on the journey. Together, they watch as the criminals are taken to prison, and afterward, they decide to stop for a meal. Rio tries the local food for the first time and is surprised by how good it tastes. Shin thanks Rio for saving Sae. Later, Rio invites Sae to a tavern where she tries local dishes. The shopkeeper suggests that Rio buy a gift for Sae, and he agrees. Sae really likes a flower hairpin, though she thinks it's too expensive. Rio insists on buying it, and the shopkeeper praises him, advising Sae not to miss her chance with such a good man. During a walk, Rio sees a man trying to abduct a young woman. He intervenes, saves her, and hands her over to her attendant, assuring them she's now safe before he disappears just as the guards arrive. Hayato's father receives the letter from the elder and learns about Rio. Sae returns to her village friends, who notice her new hairpin, which makes her blush. Rio meets with Lord Hayato, who invites him to talk. Hayato explains that he once served Rio's mother, who was of noble birth, and shares more about Rio's parents. Rio's father was a strong warrior who could combine magic with spiritual power. During one negotiation, a prince took an interest in Rio's mother, but his father defended her, killing the attacker. After a peace treaty, however, Rio's father was sentenced to death, forcing the family to flee the country. Hayato then invites Rio to visit the castle and meet the king and queen. Rio agrees, and during the meeting with the rulers, he shares the tragic story of his parents' deaths. His father died when he was young, and when Rio was 5, his mother was killed in front of him by an adventurer named Lucius. Lucius had tricked Rio, making him drink a drugged beverage, then murdered his mother. The king and queen offer their condolences. Rio also tells them how he lived in the slums from age 7, later saved a princess, and attended a noble school where he met people of high rank. He reveals his determination to avenge his mother's death. The king offers Rio a training duel with one of his top warriors, and Rio agrees, hoping to learn new techniques. On the way to the duel, he runs into the girl he recently saved, and she recognizes him. The duel begins, and Rio jumps into the fight immediately. His opponent notices Rio's impressive skills and potential, even though he occasionally loses his advantage. In a final move, Rio uses a secret technique, allowing him to defeat the king's best warrior. The girls later find Rio standing at the gravesite of his parents. The village elder tells Rio's sister that he is her brother. She is initially shocked and struggles to believe it, but eventually apologizes to Rio, vowing to honor him. Rio, however, asks her to treat him as she always has. He mentions that he plans to leave the village in a year, and the villagers hope he will return one day. Observing that Rio speaks differently with her, many others wish he would talk to them the same way. Meanwhile, Rio spends his time hunting and gathering plants, while Sayo reflects on his conversation with her and his sister. One day, Rio shares with Sayo his plan to travel across the country. Saddened, Sayo begins to cry as she contemplates his impending departure. That evening, when Sayo returns home in tears, her brother notices and persuades her to talk to Rio. Sayo soon finds herself apologizing to Rio for everything. Life goes on in the village, with Sayo training alone at night, gathering supplies, and practicing her sword skills. The harvest festival approaches, and the elder hunter suggests holding a light-hearted match. During the festivities, Sayo asks Rio to speak privately. She confesses her love for him, but Rio gently explains that he cannot return her feelings. Heartbroken, Sayo begs to join him on his journey, explaining that she's trained for months, but he refuses. She insists she wouldn't be a burden, but he still declines. Overcome, Sayo cries as Rio walks away, noticing Shin, who had been secretly watching, and apologizes to him too. That night, Rio leaves the village, saying farewell to everyone except Sayo. She meets him as he exits the village, having spoken with her master about her feelings for Rio, who suggested she should follow her heart. She tells Rio she'll continue working hard and is grateful for everything. Rio returns to the spirit folk village, where Latifa joyfully embraces him. He speaks with the elders, thanking them for their care, and mentions he won't be staying long. Rio proposes an idea to use spatial storage to move the entire house, which they agree to consider, asking him to spend time with Latifah in the meantime. Back at the house, Rio finds the village girls waiting, noting how much he has grown and how the girls have become more mature. Latifah playfully suggests they all bathe together, but the girls shyly decline, blushing. The girls wake up to the sound of Rio shouting and discover him with an unclothed girl, who quickly explains that it's a misunderstanding. The girl introduces herself as a spirit who has formed a bond with Rio. Curious, Rio starts asking her about how their bond was created, recalling how she once taught him to use spiritual energy as a child. When he inquires why she appeared now, the spirit answers that she doesn't know. Rio asks for her name, but she requests that he give her one. The other girls overhear her calling him Haruto, which surprises Rio as he realizes she knows about his past life. He decides to take his time naming her, and the Beast Girls suggest consulting Lady Dryas. The spirit girl, now standing confidently, uses magic to dress herself, and Rio names her Aishia. The other girls warmly welcome her. Later, Rio meets with the village elders and explains that Aishia has lost her memories. Spirit Dryas arrives and greets Aishia, noticing her connection with Haruto. Rio reveals he changed his name to avoid being found. To understand Aishia's power, Dryas asks what elemental skills she possesses, and Aishia surprises everyone by stating she can control all elements. Rio and Aishia decide to spar to test her strength. During the match, Aishia moves with incredible speed, matching Rio's tactics as if mirroring his abilities. She quickly vanishes from sight, using fire so powerful that it could take down a wyvern, and they engage in intense elemental exchanges. Their duel is cut short by Dryas, who warns them that continuing could endanger the village. Realizing the extent of Aishia's power, Dryas offers to teach her advanced spiritual magic, and the training begins. Meanwhile, the villagers construct a remarkable house for Rio, which he can store in his spatial storage. As Rio prepares to depart, one of the girls suggests he have a talk with Latifah. Reflecting on how absorbed he's been in training with Aishia, Rio decides to spend some time with her. Latifah approaches him and insists on helping wash his back. Although Rio initially resists, he relents, and Latifah comments on how broad his back has become. She then opens up about her past life, mentioning a boy she often saw on the bus before he tragically passed in an accident. Rio realizes she's talking about him. Latifah embraces him, promising to wait for his return, while Aishia watches from the rooftops, smiling. The village presents Rio with a teleportation crystal that allows him to return only to their village, understanding its great value. They also provide him with a tool to disguise his hair color. Dryas reminds Aishia to continue honing her skills and asks Rio to look out for Latifah. Rio and Aishia take flight, and he mentions wanting to visit Celia. Meanwhile, Celia looks at a letter from Rio when Lord Charles interrupts, calling her his fiancée. Rio and Aishia soon arrive at the city, with Rio disguising his hair. He hears of a wedding celebration and sneaks into the academy where Celia lives with Aishia's help. Finding her gone, he uses his spirit magic to learn from a passerby that Celia is at the royal palace. To his shock, he discovers that Celia is set to marry Duke Charles Arbor. Rio realizes that Celia's marriage is a political move to strengthen her family's influence. Aishia asks him what he plans to do, and he decides to infiltrate the palace to see Celia, instructing Aishia to be careful. Meanwhile, Celia is dining with her father and Duke Arbor, who confidently discusses the upcoming marriage. Her father worries about her safety, but the Duke reassures him, noting that this alliance will restore the family's reputation, which has suffered from rumors of ties with a runaway king. The Duke adds that he will soon assume a significant role in the family, and Celia's father, unable to refute, reluctantly agrees. As Rio sneaks into the well-guarded castle, Aishia helps by locating Celia's position. In her room, Celia reflects on her father and the life she's resigned to as the Duke's property. She dreams of seeing Haruto once more, realizing she had feelings for him. Just then, Rio enters and Celia, overcome with emotion, embraces him, thrilled and saying she missed him. He compliments her unchanged beauty, making her blush. Celia eagerly asks how he got there and offers him tea, but when Rio brings up her upcoming marriage, her smile fades. She tries to explain that she has no choice and jokes about running away or marrying him, though she quickly dismisses it as a jest. Celia then asks him to leave, warning that she will call for help if he doesn't. Tearfully, she thanks him for visiting but doesn't want him to get involved. Aishia, sensing the situation, assures Rio she'll help uncover the truth. Meanwhile, a royal envoy arrives to congratulate Duke Arbor on the marriage, subtly commenting on their wedding night. The envoy also senses Aishia's powerful presence nearby. In her private thoughts, Celia braces herself for the marriage, envisioning herself as a lifeless doll. The Duke introduces her to his other wives, and the first wife warns Celia to know her place as the seventh wife. Despite her attempts to smile, her emotions are painfully obvious. Princess Christina arrives at the wedding, complimenting Celia's beauty and requesting a private word. The princess congratulates her, expressing happiness for her, but Celia reveals her nerves and sleepless nights. She then thanks the princess for helping her secure freedom, apologizing for the sacrifice. Princess Christina reassures Celia that she'll restore things to the way they were. Meanwhile, Duke Arbor asks Alfred, a respected warrior, to follow his commands. As the ceremony begins, guests gather to greet the bride, calling her the Silver Bride. Celia tries to keep a composed face, but Aisha observes that she isn't smiling. Reaching out to Celia through spiritual energy, Aisha explains that Rio asked her to talk to her. Celia glances in Rio's direction and is filled with emotion, nearly crying, but the Duke reminds her to behave. She tries to communicate with Aisha again, unsure if she imagined it. Finally, Rio decides to take action and dramatically interrupts the ceremony, bursting into the wedding hall. Rio bursts into the palace, pushing through a crowd of guards, swordsmen, and mages who attempt to stop him. Duke Arbor reassures Celia, saying that his soldiers are the best in the country, yet Rio overpowers them with ease, surprising the Duke with his strength. He takes Celia hostage and the guards freeze, trying to stay calm. Communicating telepathically, Rio asks Celia to stay calm and not scream, and she agrees. The Duke is confused as to where Rio gained such power. Rio urges Celia to tell him the truth, hinting that this wedding is only for political gain. He assures her that he wants to protect those he cares about, and reminds her that once something is lost, it can't return. Rio then asks if this marriage will truly make her happy. Celia admits that she is worried for her family, fearing the consequences. Rio responds that if the wedding brought true happiness, she wouldn't look so sad. Celia then asks what he would do if she decided not to go through with it, and Rio promises to grant her wish. With tears in her eyes, Celia begs Rio to take her away. Rio rescues Celia and escapes the palace, evading the many troops pursuing him. The mages attempt to attack him, but he deflects their spells with ease. An ambassador, noticing the commotion, also tries to stop him, but Rio easily counters his attacks as well. The Duke orders Rio's capture, but Alfred, one of the best knights, takes control of the situation, stirring the Duke's frustration. As Celia observes how fast Rio is running, she jokes that he could carry her to the ends of the earth. Rio tells her he'll see her again later, and entrusts her to Aisha, asking the spirit to take Celia to a safe place. Aisha promises to share more about herself on the way, and they leave. Meanwhile, Rio creates a distraction to keep his pursuers occupied. He skillfully dodges their attacks and takes down the guards without killing anyone. Alfred stops the other knights and challenges Rio to a duel, which Rio accepts. He realizes Alfred is strong and has a magically enhanced sword. During the fight, Rio dodges Alfred's attacks and lands a powerful strike that nearly hits its mark, demonstrating his strength and speed. Celia and Aisha worry about Rio, but he soon returns, his clothes torn. Celia thanks him for rescuing her. Rio tells her that he still has something left to do, and Celia agrees to wait. Meanwhile, Aisha notices strange events beginning, as massive beams of energy shoot into the sky. Suddenly, students who were magically transported to the scene appear in danger. Rio rushes to protect them, fighting off attackers and defeating the guards. He then notices a familiar face among the students, a girl he had promised to protect long ago when they were children.